Okay, this is another episode of Thorin's Platform, and this one is going to be about Overwatch. And Volamel here is someone who's been writing for ESportSheaven over the past few months and has been doing a series most recently, which are like letters to future fans. And the concept is it's kind of like filling people in, because obviously the context within Overwatch is quite set that it is at least hoped, if the game succeeds, that a massive deluge of fans will come in now for the Overwatch League who were not here before. And so there will be history, and particularly a type of history that has nothing to do with the Overwatch League, that they would like to be informed about, or players they will want to know the details of. And so in this particular instance, you did an article which was about the player Libero, the flex player, formerly of Meta Athena, now of the New York Excelsior franchise. And so I thought this was quite an interesting player to talk about and to do an article about, because yes, he is now somewhat a popular player. He is now an established player. You will hear all the experts sing his praises and talk about what a good player he is. But if we start at the beginning, okay, one of the things I found quite curious was it's very easy for people after the fact to say how wonderful he is and what a great player and how obvious it was he was very good. But I remember when I was watching Apex, and that's when I first got to see the Meta Athena team, because I obviously didn't watch the Challenger scene, you know, I only watched the game very casually. And when I saw Meta Athena burst onto the scene, they actually were billed as a one-man team. They were billed as this gimmick team that was based around Hoon, who was the Zarya player, and had this very weird style where, as opposed to being a supportive element as Zarya, he was, but at the same time, he was like the main reason they won the game, and they sort of seemed to channel all the resources into him. And so, funnily enough, that's despite the fact he was playing with Libero, who obviously now shown to have this amazing hero pool, and actually at the same time with Saya player, who many people would probably say is perhaps the most skilled player in the team at this point in time. And in fact, Hoon, sadly, especially because he's still in the Meta organization in Bellum, has somewhat dissipated as the main star in that respect. So when they burst out in this regard, was that people were just unfamiliar with the team? Was that like a narrative that people crafted or forced on the team? Because obviously, clearly they did play that strategy in the first season that they were in of Apex. Yeah. But how much was it that's just the way it looked like it was a one-man team? Was someone like Libero a little bit lost at the time in the mix?
I think that he's always been like the catalyst for the team. I think that I think that the narrative right there is correct. I think that they did a lot of the time play around Hoon because the meta kind of allowed for it. Like Libero was usually playing D.Va at the time. They had like the one-off like double sniper compositions on like King's Row on point A, but other than that, yeah, they did really facilitate Hoon for the most point. But outside of that, I think he was more the facilitator to kind of allow for the one-off strategies, but also to add an additional kind of threat to the team. Whereas like if Hoon, couldn't get anything done, if they, shut down Hoon, because it was known that he was kind of the biggest threat on the team, or one of the main threats. Like you said, most of the resources were dumped into him. I think that he was a good anchor for the team and kind of shored up their holes, if you will.
Okay. So as I alluded to, one of the main things that people say in quickly characterizing Libero, almost the first thing people will say about him as a player, is they will point out, oh, he has this enormous hero pool, he can play a lot of different things, and particularly, obviously, I mean, if you're a flex player, obviously you're supposed to already be able to play different roles depending on what's needed. But yes, clearly, he's somewhat pushing the envelope on that, because I would always put in this context, right? The other player that people mainly say that about the most is Tavik, formerly of teams like Rogue, etc. But that's in the context largely of what he did in the Western scene. Now, if you can do all this and play all these different heroes, and you can do it in Korea and against the best teams, that takes it to a different level, because obviously there's a lot of people could pick a hero, but might get their head kicked in on it because they're playing the best teams in the world, and therefore wouldn't get the same hype, right? Right. Is he somewhat unique in that respect of having such a deep hero pool? Because obviously, just again, to address very, very casual fans, it might seem like, oh, why doesn't everyone just practice them? It doesn't matter if you practice them, it's whether you can be good enough and actually use them in the game, which is kind of what we're alluding to. So how would you characterize it in that respect?
It's actually funny, because I think you'll really enjoy this. He's known, or at least it's alluded to on broadcast. I think Wolf, Proxy Wolf on Twitter, he alluded to this on broadcast at one point, that they call him the CEO because he owns the rights to all of the heroes. He's that kind of proficient at all of these different heroes and these different roles and these different styles that he can kind of do whatever he wants. And he's that much of just a sick baller. So yeah, I think that he's just really kind of just I don't know. He's like a prodigy in some aspects because he can just effortlessly kind of play whatever he wants, it seems like, because now on Excelsior he's filling in for Jonak because he's not able to play or wasn't able to play in the preseason, so he's playing support now, which he wasn't playing previously, and he used to play flex tank, and then he transferred to projectile DPS, and he played a little bit of projectile and has some hit scan, and the kid just does everything. He does what he wants when he wants and how he wants to do it.
Okay, so obviously the significant component to that, and in fact, this is actually something I found quite interesting about Overwatch, because it seems to operate in a unique kind of niche, where in games like League of Legends, yeah, you have a set role, and oftentimes you'll have a certain champion pool that you can play, but it's much more strict, and unless you either play like a very open role like mid lane or something, or you just happen to be a very good player, typically it's kind of understood that even if you could play other things, people are going to play around whatever that strength was that you had, and you will kind of be somewhat typecast, right? Meanwhile, you go over to some other games, and in other games like Counter-Strike, for example, just being the star player, the person who gets the most kills or whatever, will often give you the rank of the best player, you know. Whereas I've noticed in Overwatch, it seems like, as I alluded to with the Tavik example, that always does seem to be a tiebreaker when you're trying to discuss who the best player is. People often take like versatility or ability to play lots of heroes as like the ultimate kind of hallmark of the great player, because in games which are heavily meta dependent like this, especially in Overwatch, we've seen like the comp that you can even run basically can determine if you even have a chance to win in a certain season. Having players like this is obviously kind of worth their weight in gold, right? So within the context of Meta Athena, as we've said, they rose up with this very weird sort of like protect the Hoon, fuel the Hoon type
Definitely.
Yeah. But they obviously have had to transition out of that, and in doing so, is this kind of how Libero has now kind of garnered this attention and kind of broken out as himself a star player?
I think that it definitely wasn't on the merits that Meta Athena did. I think you're right in saying that it was kind of his own talent in his own kind of personal prospects and being able to show off all these different heroes that he's been able to play to a, pretty high degree. So yeah, I think that it was definitely the reason why he was kind of noticed was for his own versatility and his own consistency while being very versatile, but not necessarily so much as the meta changed on the merits that Meta Athena because they kind of started to slump a little bit once they got off the triple tank meta that they were really, really good at, especially with Hoon being one of the greater Zarya players in the region. But yeah, so I think it was definitely the versatility that kind of carried him into the Overwatch League, if that answers the question. Sure.
So one thing I wondered about in this respect then, because obviously as someone just watching the game casually, I'm not someone who keeps up with like all the interviews and stuff. There's a lot of information out there. I wouldn't claim to know what his dynamic was within Meta Athena, but this is kind of how I wanted to ask it, but to put it in this context. So when you now go back and you look at the Meta Athena lineup, as I alluded to before, you look now and you go, okay, they've got Libero, I know he's really good. Hoon, yeah, he was sick when they broke out. And then now you even go, fucking hell, Saya player was in the mix there. Like everyone forgets about that one, They had some pretty talented guys. And then you had this piece who, as you said, was viewed as like a catalyst, could do a lot of aspects in the team. Right? Obviously, he doesn't play with those players now when he's at New York Excelsior. As I said, Hoon is way back there. Saya player, actually, I believe, wasn't he like too young or something? I think that might have been the reason why he isn't in.
It's possible. I know that I thought there was rumors that he was getting offers, but other than that, I'm not entirely too sure.
But nevertheless, he doesn't play with him on the New York Excelsior. But on the New York Excelsior, you do see there are players, like the obvious one is like Seobiolbi, and then to some degree Pine also had his own kind of hype, etc. Now, the Overwatch League hasn't actually begun yet. We're in the preseason. We're still figuring out how these new lineups will work and what they will be like, right? In this sense, can you contrast what you think Libero did around those star players, or what role he kind of played in the past team he was in Meta Athena, and what you would either say from early times or speculating going into the Overwatch League, what he will do in this type of a squad? Like, does he need a certain type of player around him? Are these going to be very different players to the kind he was working with?
I don't think so to a degree. As for New York Excelsior in a vacuum, they are kind of missing one of their star players in Flower, because he won't be able to participate throughout the first half, if not the first season entirely. Okay. But with the pieces that they have right now, Sabiolbi is just, in my opinion, just a flat upgrade to Sabiolbi is a flat upgrade to Saya Player. Saya Player has really shown proficiency on Tracer, but I think his best heroes come in his hit scan. So his Widowmaker, his Soldier 76, and his McCree, I think, are his hallmarks. And I think that if given the meta and given the tools, I think he'll really shine. But for Libero specifically, I don't think that he'll have too much of a trouble slotting into this New York Excelsior team, because they have so many just straight powerhouses on this team. I mean, you've got Flower, you've got the Pine, which is another one of those flex gods that he's touted as being incredibly flexible. We've seen some hints of it with him playing Ana and playing some support ish compositions back in Apex Season 3, but no, I don't think Libero should have too tough of a time. I think he plays, like I said, a ton of different stuff, and he'll be able to slot in relatively well to this team.
So with some of the players on this franchise basically being LW Blue, they were Flower's team when they were over in Korea, right? The hype around that team all the time. This just shows how you can't really like analyze the game based on results backwards and go, oh, the result shows that everything we saw and analyzed was wrong. Because the results would tell you, oh, that team was just overrated from day one. And in fact, Flower himself, you know, very good, but then in actual Apex games, was he ever that super sick, and was he really the breakout player? It never really quite seemed like he got it done, right? There was some sort of a disconnect there in both regards, the team and the individual player. But I think most people who are analysts look at the game and go, well, no, that is the storyline. It's actually that it hasn't happened yet. They didn't have the full either moment where the team came together, or where like he kind of, in terms of Flower, was fully unleashed as this mechanical god that everyone can see that he clearly is at times, and has been outside the context of the Apex games, for example, at like the IEM Gyeonggi that they had, and some of the obviously like stream type scenarios. So when you anticipate Flower joining this team, is this a team which carries a similar rep into Overwatch League? Like, is this the team where things could just come together and they could be the #1 team? And in doing so, Flower could be like the superstar player, and Libero could be, you know, the all-around player who catalyzes all these other players, and they then become the #1 team. Is that plausible, do you think?
I think that it's definitely plausible. I think that one of the big things, and it's very speculative on my end, so bear with me in my opinion, but I think one of the big things that LW Blue suffered from back in Apex was kind of, it seemed like stage fright. Like, they would do really well, they were great at doing well, but when they had to play from behind and they had to kind of rally the troops and bring up the morale, it seemed like they tended to falter a little bit. So I don't know exactly how this team is going to operate in the Overwatch League, bigger stage, live audience, you know. It's going to be more pressure on them. So I hope that I'm completely wrong and they are going to be the best team and contend with, you know, the likes of the London Spitfires and Seoul Dynasty. But just based on just kind of not statistics, but just pound for pound kind of an assessment of the teams, I think that with Flower on that team, I think that they have some serious potential and they could make some upsets, and they might maybe place top 2, maybe. I don't know if that I could say that they win the first season, but I think that they could definitely turn some heads. We'll say that.
If someone has only very casually watched Overwatch, and perhaps because of the games they've watched or whichever months they watched, they actually have only seen people in set roles and playing set, you know, 2 or 3 heroes depending on what the comp was. How rare is it to be able to not just be a flex player, but go from like a straight up carrying as a DPS to actually a tank, even not even just something in the middle? You know, how rare is it to be able to go for that kind of range?
I think it's incredibly rare, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I not to go off on a tangent, but it's incredibly rare. There's only a few players that I can name off the top of my head that are very flexible in their own role, especially when it comes to DPS, like having a projectile and a hit scan. I think players can play it to a certain level, but that kind of is a different breed that can do both. And then there's another breed on top of that can play 2 roles. And just off the top of my head, I mean, like you said, you have Tavik. I think Hoxall, Runaway, from one of Runaway's fame. I think he has played tank support and DPS, and I don't know that he's dabbled too much in hit scan, but I'm pretty sure he'd be able to play it. I mean, the kid just seems incredibly talented, and I'm sure we'll see him in the next season of the Overwatch League. But yeah, it's incredibly rare that you're going to have these players who are this versatile and also be able to maintain an equal level across the board on all of the heroes. That said, you still can kind of counter that argument and say that, yes, you're incredibly versatile, but are you going to be the best at a certain role? And that's where I think Libero tends to, I think he's the jack of a lot of trades and is very good at those trades, but I don't think he'll be the best in that role. And I don't think that's the role that he fills, but that kind of answers the question. I think he's just really good across a lot of things, but not great.
So then along these lines, because this is a very good way thematically to tie this all together, so take note, amateur interviewers out there. When you consider the different aspects he can play and the fact that initially there is no flower in that team, so for example, if they wanted to run triple DPS, he might well be on a DPS champion.
Definitely.
Is there a scenario, you think, where if the team is at their full strength and all the players are in theory capable of being fielded, would the best case scenario for someone like Libero be that he probably won't get all the props as the star player because he would end up playing more of a catalyzing role in this respect? Or do you think he will still stand out when they have the full strength and whatever the meta ends up being at that point in time?
The fun thing about Libero is that he stood out, at least for me, by playing really interesting and creative things. Like in an old interview that's kind of lost to the internet wilds now, he talked about how he was the kind of architect for this weird May boost strategy on Dorado, where they kind of used May to boost them up and slide over the roofs. They did that a few times on a few different maps, but and Monty actually had a great video where he talked about a certain Sombra strategy where they blitz a certain this one point on Hanamura, and he targeted a certain person. But I digress, and he doesn't necessarily always play the most flashy role. So will he see the most praise? Probably not, but if the meta allows it, which I think it will, I think that he'll receive praise in a different way, and I think that way comes from the creativity and the way that they can use him to kind of abuse maybe some map fallacies or some intricate little things with his hero pool that might be kind of interesting. So I think he'll see spotlight in one way, but not necessarily in the traditional sense.
Hey guys, it's Dreamforce here. You know they say that every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, God kills a Kiran? Well, this is Thorin's channel. And every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, Thorin kills a seagull.